Hello and welcome to UpSkilling Detroit, a virtual convening focused on a unique partnership among Kelly Services, the Detroit Regional Chamber, and Oakland Community College are creating a stronger learning system for the people of Greater Detroit. My name is Dakota Palicki, and I'm your host for today's conversation. We're very glad you're with us today. Around the country, communities large and small are wrestling with two big goals. First, they want to make sure people have a just and equitable chance to earn a sustaining wage and to receive the education and training required to fully participate in the labor market. Second, they want to make sure that employers have the talent they need to meet today's and tomorrow's challenges and opportunities. These places know that meeting these goals requires a new way of thinking, a way of thinking that opens the doors to and through education and into meaningful employment for thousands of their neighbors. And today's conversation is a deep dive into one of these communities that is working together in new ways to upskill residents. We're going to hear about a unique apprenticeship program designed and operated by the Kelly Certification Institute in partnership with Oakland Community College. We're going to explore why and how this program was designed, how the partnership is working together to improve the lives of Detroit area residents, and how programs like these can play an outsized role in mitigating equity barriers. Most importantly, we hope you walk away from today's conversation having learned something and inspired to either join or create a movement in your own community that puts people on a pathway to prosperity. While we have a very great lineup of speakers for you today, our conversation will be so much more improved with your engagement. Join the conversation online using hashtag UpSkillingDetroit to share your thoughts and connect with other changemakers near and far. We've also set aside some time later in the agenda to take your questions. Throughout our time together today, please submit your questions using the Q&A feature so we can tailor today's conversation to you. And again, please be sure to use that Q&A feature and not the chat. This helps us stay organized and make sure we have a chance to answer your question. Later in the hour, we're going to hear from a truly excellent panel of practitioners and leaders responsible for making this program work. We're also going to hear a specific call to action, a chance for all of us to contribute to this growing and much needed effort. But before we get to all of that, I'm delighted to be joined today by two visionary leaders who have helped and been shaping the national conversation about education, training, and the workforce. Joining me now is Jamie Marasotis, President and CEO of Lumina Foundation and author of Human Work in the Age of Smart Machines. We're also joined by Peter Quigley, President and CEO of Kelly Services, a global leader in workforce management solutions. Jamie and Peter have co-authored pieces focused on the changing landscape of skilled jobs and workers, the transition from the future of work to human work, and how our nation should approach eliminating systemic inequities that keep millions of Americans from accessing training and high-quality jobs. Jamie and Peter, thanks so much for spending some time with us today.
Thanks very much. Really appreciate it, Dakota. Wonderful to be with you. And thank you, Dakota, for your leadership in helping to improve the upskilling in communities around the country. I'm very excited about this conversation here in Detroit and have this conversation with my friend Peter. Peter, it's great to be with you.
Thank you, Jamie. You too.
I'm thrilled that we have a chance to talk more. Peter and I have sort of built our relationship over the last year, in part because we share a lot of common interests individually, but also because Kelly and Lumina have a lot of shared interests in what Dakota was just talking about, which is this idea of advancing talent, doing so in a very deliberate way, and focusing on equity as a core component of what we're all doing. So maybe I wanted to jump into our conversation, Peter, with just a quick jump into our conversation by asking you a little bit about this topic for our event today about upskilling. You know, why do you feel so passionate about upskilling and reskilling talent? And how do you see credentialing programs fitting into the upskilling landscape?
Yeah, Jamie, it's great to be with you. Thanks for the question. I'm happy to talk about Kelly's commitment and passion around upskilling. Kelly is in the business of building better futures by connecting people to work in ways that enrich their lives. It's our purpose. We call it our noble purpose. And reskilling is one pathway that workers can develop and gain new skills and capabilities that enable them to have greater access to rewarding and meaningful work and ultimately have better quality of life. When you think about, a career that might span 30, 40, even today 50 years, it's only logical to think that over that several decades, workers are going to need to retool and refresh, build upon, and even acquire new skills to adapt to the new ways of working, particularly in an era when automation is so prevalent and there's new technologies being introduced every day, and even new industries are emerging. So upskilling, simply put, is the path to the future of work. And we view credentialing, whether it's um, a workforce certificate or an industry certification or on-the-job training, as a viable opportunity for both new entrants into the workforce as well as existing members of the workforce to gain valuable and specific new knowledge, skills, and abilities that will lead to more meaningful work and better wages.
I love your definition of upskilling. I think that's really powerful and valuable. And I know Kelly has a lot of knowledge about upskilling. In fact, you've done this recent survey on upskilling, and I'd love to hear a little bit more from you about some of the findings that you found were most interesting in that recent survey.
Yeah, Jamie, there's a lot there, but we interviewed C-level and director level executives from the employers, and then also our professional and industrial employees who are on assignment for Kelly in the U.S. And on the employee side, the results are fascinating. Simply put, the headline is workers crave learning while working, and there's a clear indication that this is how they view growing personally and professionally through opportunities for learning at work. Specifically, 6 out of 10 recognize that they're going to need to engage in some kind of upskilling and reskilling to compete for jobs in the future. 7 out of 10 will gladly take up the opportunity if offered by an employer to participate in upskilling and reskilling, and 8 out of 10 say that training and career advancement is an important part of when they're looking for their next job. Unfortunately, only about half understand what skills meet today's employer needs, and also it's uncertain around how they and what skills they can develop to boost their position in the labor market. But overall, I'm very encouraged by the fact that we have so much demand for continuous learning in the workforce. On the employer side, also enlightening, employers recognize that education and training is key to improving service, productivity, and overall work quality. By the numbers, 8 in 10 say that employees need more education, training, and certifications if they're going to have access to higher quality work. So we have both the supply and demand side recognizing the importance of upskilling and reskilling. And now it's a matter of collaborating to figure out how to bring more of those opportunities to life. And that's why we're here today to talk about the work that Kelly's doing as an example with our great partners right here in Detroit in our backyard.
Fantastic. That's great news.
So Jamie, maybe if I could just turn the tables on you a little bit. Dakota mentioned your really thoughtful book, which I have a copy here, Human Work. And I'm just curious, when one of the themes in that book is earning, learning, and serving. And I'm just curious how that translates in communities like Detroit and Indianapolis and other regions around the country as we think about upskilling and reskilling talent for the future.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's going to be surprised to hear this headline, but work is changing. And we know it's changing because of technology, because of the rising demands for talent. And so we've got to think about work in different ways. And as I explained in the book, I think that we've got to prepare people for the work that only humans can do. But human work is really very different, I think, Peter, than the work that I think we've historically thought about. I think we've historically thought about work as being performing tasks in return for remuneration. And those tasks it was largely a transactional relationship. But we know as humans that as technology can perform more and more of the tasks that humans can do, that what we really want from work is work that means something, that matters. We want dignity, and we want to have social impact, and we want to have purpose. But we also need to make a living, and we also need to contribute to our communities. So this idea of earning, learning, and serving, I think, is really important. It's a virtuous cycle that we all need to go through as human workers. It's not that you sort of learn at one point in your life and then earn, and maybe if you have time, serve at a later point in your life. It's that all of these things are happening at the same time. And communities like Detroit or Indianapolis or other regions across the nation, I think, are going through this metamorphosis of understanding that we've got to prepare people for this rising demand for talent that is increasingly human in nature. And that means that we've got to think about this ecosystem of earning, learning, and serving in different ways. It means that there's got to be a collaborative spirit that involves employers, educators, the workers themselves, organizations like us as philanthropic organizations, all working in concert, in collaboration, in order to actually meet this rising demand for talent and give workers that agency that they want and deserve, so that they can earn, they can learn, and they can serve, they can give back throughout their entire work lifetimes.
Yeah, Jamie, those messages are, I think, even more relevant in the pandemic and post-pandemic environment, where I think workers and employers have reevaluated some of their purposes and the meaning that they get out of their work. So very, very apt. I know Lumina as a funder is very focused on equity, as Kelly is in our Equity at Work program. I know there have been some programs around credentialing and community colleges. Can you just speak to how those initiatives and the combination have particular impact for people of color in our communities?
Let me say, first that Lumina has been and will continue to be focused on this idea that increasing educational attainment really matters for individuals and society. But we cannot simply increase the numbers without understanding that equity has to come first in all that we do. And so, we've recently focused on community colleges and short-term credentials as a part of that, in part because we need to make sure that we get individuals onto pathways of learning opportunities that gets them into that cycle that we were talking about a moment ago of earning, learning, and serving others over the course of their entire lifetime. And as you pointed out, Peter, the reality of COVID is that COVID revealed and probably accelerated trends that we saw before COVID, which is that workers of color were increasingly being left behind as technology was changing work, as racial inequity and injustice were rising in different ways in communities. And so finding ways to ensure that as we build new systems of learning and working, that we put our thumb on the scale of equity in all that we do, I think is going to be increasingly important. So, for me, I think that at the end of the day, organizations like Lumina have to work in partnership with companies like Kelly, with our community partners, in community-based organizations, in chambers of commerce, in all kinds of different entities, educational institutions, in order to actually credential and upskill these workers, especially these workers of color, for this increasingly changing nature of work that we're facing.
Yeah, couldn't agree more, Jamie. Thank you for that. Very thoughtful. And I think now, at this point in the session, I'm going to kick it back over to Dakota to introduce our panel.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jamie and Peter, for not only joining us today, for your continued thought leadership in this space, but also just letting us listen into your conversation today. It feels like every time I hear either of you or both of you talk together, I know I learned something new. And, just based on that conversation, we're already walking away with a better understanding about what upskilling is and how it plays an important role in making sure that people are kept up to date with the changing demands of the workforce, especially when it comes to certain drivers like AI and other kinds of advancement. It's also clear, based on Kelly's survey work, that people are very eager for this kind of training while they are employed. The demand for continued learning is strong, and our education and training systems need to be ready to meet that demand. I also heard Jamie talk about that what people really want from work is work that actually matters, that gives us dignity and allows us to sustain ourselves and our communities. And what that means is that we have to redesign how our local and state and federal systems of education and training meet that rising demand for talent, allowing people to earn, learn, and serve throughout their entire lifetime. That notion of organizations coming together to meet this demand really does frame our panel very, very well, because we're going to have this chance here to hear about how Detroit is doing just that. So to continue our conversation today, I'm delighted to welcome to our stage here our panel of experts and practitioners. With me now is Stacy Cruz, Dean of Student Services at Oakland Community College. With a career spanning over 20 years in higher education, Stacy is a fierce advocate and champion for students, leading several efforts to make sure students complete their program of study at Oakland. Stacy, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Also joining us is Melanie DeEvelyn, Director of Detroit Drives Degrees at the Detroit Regional Chamber. Melanie leads cross-sector efforts focused on increasing post-secondary attainment to accelerate economic prosperity and greater equity. She spearheaded a multi-institutional debt forgiveness compact that has led to debt relief for hundreds of returning adult students and regularly writes and speaks about higher education policy. Melanie, it's fantastic as always to be with you today.
Glad to be here.
Yeah. Our last panelist is Ed Peterson, Vice President of Product at Kelly Services, responsible for designing Kelly's master product strategy. Ed and his team keep busy helping Kelly and their clients prepare for the future of work. Ed and his team lead the Kelly Certification Institute, the focus of today's conversation, and is a key partner in providing training and jobs connected to regional labor demand. Ed, again, we're really glad that you're with us today.
Looking forward to the discussion.
Yeah, me too. So, Ed, I just want to stick with you. We've heard a lot about kind of the big ideas that we're talking about today, but it's time to bring it local and deeply local. So, we've heard about why credentials are important to Kelly. It's clear that Kelly has been very active in helping people earn credentials that lead to good jobs. You and I have talked about before that Kelly has trained over 1,300 people in manufacturing practices, particularly in the pharmaceutical manufacturing industry around the globe. But setting all that program training aside for a moment, we're really here today to talk about the apprenticeship program you have going on in Detroit. Can you just give us and the listeners here, the basics? What is the apprenticeship program? What does it aim to do?
Yeah, so when Kelly declared that they were a specialty company and really wanted to focus on some niche segments, which related to a lot of the different jobs and things that we were filling for our customers, it was very natural for us to layer into that the discussion of how do we prepare a future workforce where perhaps there's scarce talent and develop them into individuals that our customers would want to work with. With Detroit being right in our backyard, our headquarters in Troy, Michigan, and what have you, obviously we have a very strong connection to the region, a lot of customers and what have you. And so we looked at the cross section of data in terms of what types of positions were we filling, what were some potential partners, and what have you, and it quickly led us into kind of skilled trade sorts of roles. And so as I got engaged with the Detroit Chamber and we were looking at things like credentials of value where, they were casting the net even wider to say, where were some of those gaps that they saw in their employer base, which ones were going to be even more valuable in the future, where did we have insufficient supply and what have you. We started to think like there was a very strong possibility and therefore something pretty niche and pretty special in the form of apprenticeship services. So with us looking for and having a whole bunch of customers with requisitions for skilled trade sorts of roles and having this relationship with the Detroit Chamber, the next question is where do we find the sources of the talent? And that really led us to the OCC, Oakland Community College, for their training programs that they have in some of the skilled trades that we're looking for. So essentially what we're trying to do is create this magic in the middle, if you will, of demand for individuals and the supply of individuals coming out of higher education settings in the form of apprenticeship. So OCC creates like this really great, 4 to 5 week training program that teaches you how to be a machinist. It goes in and this is the machine, this is how you set it up, this is how you manufacture parts, this is how you maintain it, and what have you. As they're graduating out of that program, they move into some of our cohorts that we are actively bringing to our customer base. And a lot of these customers may be aware of what an apprenticeship program might look like, but we've kind of demystified all that for them. So part of the value add service that we bring to these customers is how to actually set up apprenticeships in the first place. What do you need to do in terms of reporting? What do the relationships need to look like? What might a graduated pay scale be? Is there mentorship or is there not? And things of that nature, and really kind of connect those two together. So we started this with OCC in the Detroit chamber probably last spring. We've had 2 cohorts graduate out of the OCC already. We've brought those individuals to 2 of our customers, and we continue to look for expanding opportunities with our customer base, as well as looking forward to the increased supply from OCC.
I mean, that's a blazing fast timeline, and congrats for completing that. I mean, getting these kinds of programs up and running is no easy feat. And I want to go back a little bit because to me, as someone who works at the local level a lot to try to help these partnerships kind of form and come together and function well, one of the most fascinating parts is really how Kelly got involved and how you ended up working with the chamber and OCC to develop this program. You touched on it briefly, but I think for some folks who might be listening into this conversation today saying, where do I start? That might be a good place for us to just linger on for a moment. You had shared with me during one of our prep calls that, you were having conversations about the future of work, and they all felt very academic. And you had recognized the need to really shift towards a pragmatic approach, a pragmatic conversation. And that as you and Kelly were seeing this dramatic shift in the workforce, you knew that you're going to need to respond. So, can you talk a little bit about some of those early conversations and that thinking, in hopes that maybe some of our listeners today might see themselves in that and maybe follow your early development lead to make sure they can build a successful program like you have today?
Yeah, the future of work is a very big and kind of sexy topic, right? A lot of people like to talk about, in 10 years, 70% of the jobs are going to be something different. Like my kids, as they graduate university and what have you, their first roles in the workforce are going to be completely different than what I experienced. And I think what I pride our product organization on is how do we take that very academic conversation and creating very tangible steps for our customer base. And so when we were looking at this problem and we were exploring kind of what's going on with our customers, with our talent and what have you, we started to notice some interesting trends. So on the client side, a lot of our customers were making big strategic shifts in terms of who they wanted to be as a company. And you could look at some pretty prominent names like Toyota as an example, where they made a declarative statement that said, we are now a mobility company, which is well beyond just cars and trucks and forklift, equipment and things of that nature, and getting into robotic arms and prosthetic limbs and, kind of really, stuff that you don't really think of Toyota for. And so as we were looking at these customers, they were investing in what have you, what we also noticed was there was a fundamental problem that a lot of them had. One is, they have this workforce of today that's meeting their demands for what their current near-term strategy is, and they have aspirations to be something else in the future, and they need a vastly different workforce to meet that demand. And so as we were looking for products and services that we could help them along on this sort of strategic workforce planning journey, one very logical skill or opportunity was to bring reskilling, upskilling, and certification sorts of services to them. So there's going to be a portion that you can take from your existing workforce and help them along. There's going to be another portion that you need to focus on, perhaps new acquisition sources, or even develop new skills that don't even exist today. So it was a very strong match in terms of how we could support our customers into the future. And with that, We then take in some very basic, skills and tools to work with those customers to understand how they take that first step. How do you analyze your workforce? And then overlay that with what we've already created in something like the Kelly Certification Institute to really enable that journey to occur.
That's incredibly helpful, and I think just goes to show the power of these local kind of relationships and really regional thinking on the kind of stakeholders that are in a given region, particularly those private industries who are really thinking about what's going to be next on their horizon, and then matching that to labor demand. And I think this is a great time to get Melanie into the conversation here. Melanie, a big part of your job at Detroit Drives Degrees and with the Chamber is to help coordinate all the system of partners, and I know it's a long list. It's a long list of institutions and businesses and community organizations and philanthropy, and you have the yeoman's work of trying to make sure everyone's kind of swimming in the right direction, or whatever analogy you want to use today. I'm hoping that you can bring us into that regional context, and talk a little bit about the needs for these kinds of programs, how they fit into Detroit's ecosystem and respond to Detroit's talent goals.
Yeah, thanks, Dakota. I mean, I'm so grateful for this session today to kind of lift up this partnership between Kelly and OCC, because it is an exact sort of microcosm of the type of partnership and collaboration we endeavor to support and scale through Detroit Drives Degrees. So as you mentioned, Dakota, Detroit Drives Degrees is an initiative of the Detroit Regional Chamber, and we bring together cross-sector leaders, like you said, in business and higher ed and in K-12, philanthropy, all with two core goals of sort of directing our collaborative work. And that is to achieve 60% post-secondary attainment by the year 2030, and our equally important kind of corollary goal of reducing racial equity gaps in half during that same time period over the next decade. And so a partnership like this, I think, is kind of really is rooted in sort of a practicality and sort of is illustrative of the types of initiatives we want to scale, not only with other employers potentially, but other higher ed institutions. And I'm so proud that we have at the table Peter Quigley as chair of our CEO Talent Council, and also Peter Provenzano, the chancellor at Oakland Community College, sort of working together alongside of, like you said, about 35 other stakeholders that we collaborate with to move the needle in force collectively.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, you mentioned that number 35 partners, and I know all of them are the best partner you can ever dream of, and they're all unique and wonderful in their own way, putting on my stakeholder engagement hat there for a second. But I'll say, just from a national perspective, that, we know for these kinds of partnerships that, quite frankly, there are some partners that are a little bit better at this collaboration, at making the system work, at really coming together to move towards that more human work that we've been talking about. From your perspective, what really makes Kelly and the Kelly Certification Institute a unique partner in the broader Detroit region?
Well, I will use that as an excuse, Dakota. I do think we have some of the most committed and kind of sustaining partners here in the Detroit region, and I'm very proud of all 35 of them. I think, when it comes to Kelly and OCC in this particular case, I've been thinking about this, and I think in Kelly's case, I think it's really striking that they have sought to identify strategies to really improve the alignment. Oftentimes we talk about the need for kind of broad scale credential attainment. That's on the agenda of many metropolitan regions and states across the country. But this idea of alignment is a trickier one. And I really applaud Kelly for not only endeavoring to tackle that, but also sort of walking the walk and saying, most businesses could easily tout to sort of what their talent needs are. It's harder for businesses to be able to say, yes, these are our talent needs, and we're willing to commit to hiring those individuals, once we develop that talent. And I really commend Kelly for taking a leadership role on that, because I know that is a pivotal pivotal component of making a relationship between a higher ed institution and a business work. The other side of the coin here is OCC's role, and it is not easy work to adjust academic programming or sort of craft these new academic programs that are responsive to employer needs. And so I think OCC's work in being adaptive and working collaboratively despite all those barriers is really commendable.
Yeah, and certainly that alignment piece, Melanie, is just, you're right. It's just so critical. It's one of the things that really makes a big difference between this kind of work. Just a reminder to those that are listening in today, be sure to submit your questions using the Q&A feature so we can be sure to get to them in just a few minutes. And also join the conversation online using hashtag UpSkillingDetroit. Stacy, we were just talking about OCC. I think that you have a really unique vantage point because, Melanie teed it up perfectly. A lot of times when we talk about these partnerships between the private sector and higher ed, the relationships kind of stay on that academic side of the house, those that are responsible for creating the curriculum, providing instruction and all those pieces. But, as the Dean of Student Services, it's your job to make sure the whole student is able to succeed in their pursuits at Oakland. So thinking about student success, what are some of the common challenges that you see students facing, particularly when pursuing these kinds of credentials and get involved in these kinds of apprenticeship programs?
Thank you for that question, Dakota. And I definitely interact with students all the time who may be faced with a number of challenges in just being a student altogether. It takes time commitment to make that dedication to be a student, whether they're going for a degree seeking program or a credential. And so students have to find time and balance their time between other commitments that they may be facing. They may be the first person in their family to seek out such a journey. And so they have to put some of those things on the back burner for just a small portion of time so they can achieve that goal of closing that equity pay gap that they may be in the midst of living. Some other challenges students may face will be feeling overwhelmed and not knowing how to find the support that they need because they may be the first person in their family seeking such a credential. And so finding support networks within the Kelly Institute as well as here at OCC. We have a number of great resources here at OCC by way of our counseling department, by way of our student support academic office and our access office. And so we have support systems in place for those students who are facing such challenges. But I also think another challenge students may face is not knowing how to network. That's not something students learn naturally. And I think in connection with the Kelly Institute, those barriers can be lessened for the student. And so those are some of the possible challenges that students may face as they enter into such a relationship with the Kelly Institute.
Yeah, Stacey, I think you've nailed some really good ones here. Certainly the time component, the management component of trying to, fit in, pursuing the education and training you need to be successful while working, while supporting a family. Certainly, I'm reminded of what Melanie just left us with about the importance of alignment and the kind of work that OCC and Kelly Certification Institute is doing around aligning support services. And I guess, if you can just expound a little bit further, you kind of ended on the point about networking, which into my mind, I'm hearing, how are we helping students build social capital that they might not have otherwise been able to build? Are there other key components to the Kelly Certification Institute from your perspective that help students overcome some of the barriers and allow them to succeed? And I'm really asking that question because I think there are a lot of folks on the line today that probably know a program or are part of a program and really could learn a thing or two from about how you all are approaching student success.
I think just thinking about students who may have been removed from an official structure of the classroom learning to the on-the-job training really helps to put a student in a place where they can see, going back to the book, the earning, learning, and serving model in real time and live and in action. And so having someone to actually provide them with what it means to be on the job. These are the skills that are needed for the job. These are the soft skills. I think we can always teach the hard skills, but those soft skills are not something that's in a textbook. And so you have to learn that from the employer by interacting, by networking, both networking up and across, so with other students who are going into the field with you, as well as those who are holding the position of manager or director in those fields. And so I think those type of skill sets in terms of networking are going to be important, and I think Kelly is in a place to provide those opportunities to students.
Yeah, and Stacy, oh yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, if I wouldn't mind, just to add on to that, it's kind of interesting. Like if you look at the historical context of the industry that Kelly plays in, is 75 years ago we got our start as a company, and predominantly focused on bringing mid-career women that are maybe coming out of caretaking and what have you with their families and wanting to get back into the workforce, and we would train them, we would give them the tools and what have you, and it was really focused on the talent. It was like to be a Kelly girl within that context and what have you is the name that was given. They were able to turn down 3-4 jobs and pick the one that they wanted. And as the industry progressed over the decades and the years and what have you, the pendulum really kind of swung away from being talent focused to being much more client focused. I mean, they're the ones who pay the bills, right? They're the ones that do the paychecks. They pay us as a company to fill the requisitions and what have you. And I think the industry lost sight somewhat of having that talent focus. So by implementing something like the Kelly Certification Institute, we're trying to swing that pendulum back somewhere in the middle to help break down those barriers, because it's a complicated model. For as many available jobs that exist out there today, if you're new to that landscape, perhaps you don't know anybody in that industry, you didn't have like friends or family or what have you, it is helpful to have a guide. And so OCC giving you the skills, then you transition over to Kelly, we introduce you to companies, and you have an advocate, if you will, that will help you land that first job and move into that next iteration of your career to move up the pay scale and what have you, is I think something that can be pretty powerful.
Yeah, I mean, Stacey, I think that was something you and I talked about in the prep call too, which is to say, one of the differences is that, I think for students entering this, they can see the kind of what's this for, I mean, I think, for some folks, they go and they pursue credentials. They don't necessarily see an immediate job opportunity at the end, but that's certainly one of the things that makes us unique.
Definitely. Students, regardless of where they are in their investment, they want to see an immediate return sometimes, and sometimes you have to put in for the long haul. And at least with this credentialing, you're not making such a heavy time commitment. You're making a couple of weeks of a commitment and can see that investment being given to you immediately with the matchup of an employer to meet the needs of your personal needs financially, as well as the needs for the market.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, right? On the learner side, they're eager to get it through, get it done, and make sure it's on, on time, real time, quickly, and get to that next step. And on the employer side, we're asking for the same thing. And so, making those two systems work to meet that demand on both sides is really important. In about 6 minutes or so, we're going to start taking some questions from the audience. And again, folks, as a reminder, please submit your questions using that Q&A feature at the bottom. And also make sure you're engaging online at using the hashtag UpSkillingDetroit. In our last little bit here, though, team, I kind of want to talk a little bit about equity. Peter had kind of framed up the Kelly's Equity at Work movement. And I know that the Kelly Certification Institute is deeply connected into that movement. The movement itself is a global movement focused on building an alliance to build a more inclusive workforce by tackling barriers, things like overcoming criminal histories, changing hiring practices, and of course, focusing on education and training. But since it's that global movement, we know equity can be highly contextual to a place. And so, Ed, I was just curious, how have you really designed this local work here in Detroit to address regional equity barriers while still maintaining connection to this global movement that Kelly is spearheading?
I think this apprenticeship program is a really great example of it. like through the studies and the data that we've looked at and the opportunity that was created, it's a very real problem that Detroit is trying to handle, and how to create additional talent that can feed the market and what have you. But it's also a parallel problem that we can apply to a lot of other places around the United States and more broadly into the globe. And so like it would be very interesting to, once we prove this out, to scale this with other community colleges, with other chambers across the country and what have you, to help solve for some of the exact same issues.
Yeah, Stacy, listening to what Ed just shared, I think from your perspective as a student success practitioner and someone responsible for the success of these students, I got to imagine it's pretty important that your partners like Kelly show up authentically in conversations and initiatives. Can you talk a little bit about how you can kind of know when a partner like Kelly is actually showing up authentically versus, I guess, non-authentically?
Yeah, I think it goes back to Kelly helping to remove some of those barriers for those students to be successful and to show up as their true authentic selves. Those students that we engage with are coming from all walks of life and have different backgrounds. And so creating a space where they can learn intentionally and for equity to be intentional designed is going to be important. I think regardless of a student's past, and that can range from their educational attainment and understanding and ability to a criminal background, this is an opportunity for them to reshape who they are and to help again close that equity pay gap that they may have been experiencing.
Yeah, Melanie, I'm curious if you have some thoughts on this too. I see you kind of jumping in here.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned earlier one of the orienting goals of Detroit Drives Degrees is centered around equity. And I was just looking this up, actually using the Illumina Stronger Nation report. Our equity gap in the state of Michigan is about 17 percentage points between white adult attainment and Black adult attainment. And so, reducing that in half over the next decade is no small endeavor. And I think for our collaborators, we wanted to tackle this not just as some sort of notional ambition, but to really have a concrete methodology and strategy for how we were going to do that. And so last October, we ratified something called the Detroit Regional Talent Compact, which was exactly that, sort of a blueprint for how we were going to achieve our attainment and racial equity goals. And what I really appreciate about the compact is embedded in that are these 17 concrete strategies that we're going to deploy. So Dakota, you mentioned one in your introduction, and that is expanding debt forgiveness that institutions provide that is particularly relevant to this adult population we're talking about today. Ed mentioned another, which is sort of really putting a definition around what it means to be a credential of value in the Detroit labor market. So not only that there's demand there, but that those credentials of value that actually have are associated with family sustaining wages and have kind of mobility, economic mobility over time and growth attached with it. Those are some of the key strategies that our partners are working together to implement right now to achieve our equity goal. And I think, another, like I was reflecting a bit on what Stacy and Ed were saying about this apprenticeship program. I feel like the niche for Detroit Drives Degrees in this is to also kind of build and scale upon what they're doing. So we know, from the opening comments that this upskilling is not a one and done thing, right? It's the new, what all of us are confronting is that we are going to have to continually learn and relearn throughout our careers. And so we know that a 4-week apprenticeship program, can lead to new career opportunities, but that's not going to be kind of likely the last educational endeavor that most individuals do. So what can we layer on top of that? How can we make these credentials stackable? So that we continue the momentum, continue the economic mobility of the residents of our region.
Well, this has been a really great conversation. We have some great questions coming in through the chat here. So looking forward to jumping into some of our audience Q&A. And again, audience, please continue to submit your questions using the Q&A function, and join on online conversation at #UpskillingDetroit. Just a couple of pragmatic ones for our panelists. I think there's some really good interest in some details about the work itself. First is, do students actually receive academic credit for their work as part of the program? And how does the program help students stay on their education pathway, preventing them from dropping out or stopping out once they have acquired some of these additional skills? Ed, do you want to take maybe that one?
Yeah. So, and maybe Stacy can chime in terms of the credit that gets achieved at OCC. I mean, it is a course you do get credentialed out of it, and it is something that you can put onto your resume. So yes, it's a great first step in that space. And to extend off of what Melanie said, is it doesn't stop there. An apprenticeship journey goes into the future, several years until you work your way up to kind of a journeyman status for a machinist or something of that nature. But you do expand that out into a broader conversation around, the world of work is going to continue to change, and it's going to change, much more quickly. Another example I like to use is that of like a truck driver. It's a very in-demand position that we have here in the United States. If you quit your job with one company today, chances are you can get one tomorrow with another company at a higher wage and what have you. But what happens when the autonomous truck comes into play and truck drivers no longer are as needed? And it's not something that's going to happen overnight, mind you. But the question is what's next for the people that have developed skills as a truck driver, and can we create kind of this continuous learning environment to upskill them into maybe a logistics advisor or something in a completely, different industry and what have you. So you do, there's value in both for the customers as well as in the talent as we look through all this.
Yeah. From the OCC side, students are taking college level courses, most likely on a part-time basis while they are maintaining full-time employment, but that will equal into the final result of a college credential.
Yeah,
and so they are meeting with a counselor on a regular basis to make sure that they are taking the correct path of courses, and also providing support to them, as I mentioned, through some of the other support services that we have here at the college by way of Academic Support Center, our Access Department. And so we are supporting those students every step of the way.
Yeah, it's good to hear. And one other kind of tactical question that's come in is, are the credentialing courses certified by the institution or by an outside body? And, how have you gone about designing courses to really keep in mind and up to date with upskilling jobs that, these individuals are going to be filling eventually?
Stacy, did you want to grab that one?
So that is a partnership between OCC and our faculty and academic side of the house, in conjunction with the Kelly Institute and the employers and what they're looking for. So that is a great partnership for some synergy centered around what we offer to make sure that we are supplying the demand that is out there.
I gotta imagine. Yeah, please go ahead.
I was going to say, Dakota, I think this is an area where we've had several discussions with some of our higher ed institutions and with our employer partners about making sure that, to whatever extent possible, we can make credit transferable, whether it's something, training that individual receives at Kelly Certification Institute, separate from the OCC program, making sure that they get credit for that valuable learning that happened there. And similarly with OCC, if an individual would, like to continue their studies at Oakland University, making sure that that kind of goes with them and that they own that credit, and that they can continue to benefit from the learning that they've achieved and be able to demonstrate that more universally. I think that's a key component of this.
Yeah, I mean, I think that leads into another question that we just had, Melanie, about kind of making sure that all learning might count. Someone's also asking, how do we make sure that the skills people gain while they're on the job are actually valued in a way so upskilling can be more like a targeted top up of specific competencies that ease their way onto future high-paying jobs and future kind of career paths, rather than someone having to stop completely their whole life and find a way to fund several years or even months of a training program. So, how might we think about making sure that the on-the-job training is being recognized as well, and that we're providing an education and training program that allows people to do that kind of topping up and upskilling in an effective way?
Yeah, I mean, frankly, that's why I'm so excited about this project we're talking about today, because I think, this is an area where we are trying to sort of learn from national best practices and bring them to Detroit. We're actually in the process of talking with each of our 12 higher ed institutions right now to see, what are the practices and policies in place right now for how they accept prior learning. Do they have an interest in sort of ramping up that work in the future? And I think, frankly, this relationship between OCC and Kelly demonstrating that there is, it's healthy and good, not just for individual students, but also for both of their organizations to have a back and forth on this and sort of, to whatever extent possible, reciprocity, right? I think that is really promising for the types of programs we would be able to scale regionally.
I think what I'd add into that is, like there's definitely a heavy piece in here that the employers need to recognize that exactly this question is like, you do need to create space within your organization for career paths, for attaining different, skills and certifications and what have you that align with, the company needs and what have you. And I think the intersection for us is that, we're going to continue to evolve how we do business to create those specific opportunities, because it can, like what you learn on the job at one employer is definitely relevant in a good background for what you could use at another employer, but perhaps missing one small little component. And with our partnering strategy with the Kelly Certification Institute is we can solve for those little add-on pieces. So as people are looking to stair step their way up in whatever their career path, looks to be, they can interface with us, find the job, also get the credential that we can then suggest to them to say, hey, something of 50-60% of jobs are requiring this sort of skill. If you want to get it, go get it here, and so on and so forth. So I think it's going to take all parts, and education is a key element to it in response to how fast the changing skill sets are going out there.
Yeah, we have about a minute and a half left for audience Q&A, and we do have some good ones that we won't regrettably be able to get to. But I kind of want to end with you all getting a question that we have kind of about racial equity, in particular from a business partner who's listening in today. Someone writes to us, that they are a partner in a large architectural and engineering firm. They're very passionate about recruiting young professionals of color, but it has been challenging. So, how can a private sector company looking to, fulfill their own equity commitment, do this in a better way? What advice do we have for them?
Yeah. So I think what I'd like to do is again, this is another one of those big problem statements that's super important to a lot of companies. And the question is how do I take that tangible first step? And one of the things that Kelly introduced over this past year is something we call Kelly Discover. And really, it's the bridge of that conversation focused on a couple of underutilized talent groups that we recognize there's a need to help facilitate getting them into the workforce. Where Kelly sits in the equation is, we have access to the requisitions and the jobs that our employers are asking for. And we also have the relationships with different institutions, philanthropic organizations, and what have you that can help us meet the talent, pool the talent, cultivate it, and so on and so forth. And so we kind of play this bridge role. So the two areas that we started in with that particular program was for neurodiverse individuals, and then also a segment of the population called opportunity talent. And these are, typically, inner city 18 to 24-year-olds that perhaps don't have the capabilities to go on maybe a higher ed journey like some other demographics that are out there. And so what we do is we sit down with the employer and we help identify what are those roles that tend to be really great starter points for those types of talent groupings. And as we see those roles come through into our programs, we can flag them to go through our Kelly Discover route. And so you create this very intentional flow in terms of how do I identify which positions would be great for this, and then how do you connect to those sources of talent. And I think, just another great example of how we're directly approaching that particular topic.
And I'll just add quickly, we at the Detroit Chamber actually just recently released something we're calling our Employer Toolkit, which is aimed at exactly at this question, sort of taking those strategies that employers can use to most effectively upskill and educate their workforce, and sort of racial equity is a central kind of theme throughout all that. At a high level, I would just say quickly, looking at your existing workforce, not just the workforce you kind of seek to recruit, is a key theme here. Providing paid internships is a real issue of equity, and also sort of forging relationships with nonprofits in the community that have the trust and relationships with communities of color, I think, are really imperative. So, but take a look at the Detroit Chamber's website for that Employer Toolkit. I think that will provide a wealth of information as well.
Yeah,
I did want to add, if I could just add, not just internships, but also opportunities for mentorships. And those don't have to be paid, but just creating opportunities for those aspiring to be in those fields to connect with someone, to have that relationship and hear one-on-one what it's like to be in that field. So expanding on mentor opportunities as well.
Yeah, that's really, really great. Ed, Melanie, Stacy, thank you so much for joining us today, sharing your experiences and insights. I know I've learned a lot. I'm sure our audience feels the same way. Folks, there's been a lot of great information, ideas, and insights shared with us today, but I know we need to start somewhere. So to help us figure out what a next step could be, I'd like to welcome back Peter Quigley to share his thoughts on how we might move forward together. Peter.
Thanks, Dakota. It's pretty clear from the panel, I think you'll agree, that there are a lot of programs and initiatives and ideas that share a common goal, which is to make the Detroit region a more prosperous place for workers and their families. We're very committed to this at Kelly, but we can't do it alone. We've developed some very strong partnerships, as evidenced today, with OCC and Detroit Drives Degrees and the Chamber and Lumina, and because that's what we need. And today I'd like to encourage business leaders and like-minded organizations who are inspired by the conversation today, who see the opportunity to get involved, to participate, to support the efforts that are already underway. I encourage community colleges, four-year institutions, work training programs to get connected with the private sector so we can work together to ensure that credentials are leading to real economic opportunity for the individuals. And finally, calling on the public sector and philanthropic organizations to continue, if not accelerate, your support of the collective effort that you heard about today. Because ultimately it's going to take that collaboration for us to deliver the kinds of results that we all aspire to, not only for the region, but ultimately for the country.
Thanks so much, Peter, for bringing us to action and helping us close out. What I'm hearing you saying is that, together we have to ask ourselves, what can we do together that we cannot do alone? And that only by working together across sectors, supporting efforts that are already underway, rather than reinventing the wheel, we can truly improve the lives of our community in the ways that matter most. To close, I just want to thank Jamie Marasotis and Peter Quigley for starting this conversation today, and again for providing that national thought leadership that really shapes the efforts around the country. My thanks too to our panelists, Stacy, Melanie, and Ed, for your gift of time, and more importantly, for your daily work to improve the system for Detroit area residents. Today would not have been possible without the help of a lot of folks behind the scenes. A big thank you goes out to Domi Raymond, Michelle Lasley, Molly Barrick, Jane Stenney, Christian Tasca, Harvey Yao, and Cameron Albring. Thanks to the entire team at Agency EA who's helping to run today's event. And finally, thank you for joining us. Be sure to continue the conversation online using hashtag UpskillingDetroit. My name is Dakota Palicki. It's been a pleasure to be the host of today's conversation. Thank you again for being with us, and we'll see you next time.